Hi, this is Mark the Malicious Carp, and I'm here to bring you 2025's Scary Goat Story for Christmas time. Get the glasses on here and let's go. Alexander was your typical, overly reliable office worker. He was the type of worker who could be counted on to show up on time, brew more coffee when the carafe was empty, and finish all of his assignments on time. While he wasn't very fond of his job, he knew that he had to keep it. The job was a source of income, health care, and lately, social interactions. The very thought of losing his job would keep him up at night. This was a constant worry that extended far beyond a loss of a lifestyle that he was accustomed to. This was a looming crisis that would take his home, health, and family away. When he started to think about this, he couldn't stop. His mind would race, thinking of all the ways his life would be torn apart. His heart would beat hard and deep as if he had just sprinted up a flight of stairs. His mouth would go dry, and he would feel like vomiting despite having an empty stomach. He wanted to scream, but physically he knew that he couldn't. This fear was only made worse by the fact that his coworkers kept going missing. One day there would be Ted, and the next day there would be an empty cubicle where Ted used to work, and an email stating simply that Ted was no longer with the company. No contact information, no reasons, just a plain and simple, Ted is no longer with the company. Ted's work would be reassigned and no one would ever mention him again. Over time, even the work that Ted had done would start to lose the very memory of him. Documents that were marked as having been created by Ted would become created by Ted, inactive user, and then inevitably created by deleted user. Alexander was left to ponder when he might become the subject of a no longer with the company email, when his legacy would be erased and absorbed back into the system, when he would effectively cease to exist in the office. Alexander did try to keep current with gossip around the office. He saw that as a way to prevent himself from becoming the subject of an email. Lately, the gossip had mostly been around strange and terrible noises that could sometimes be heard from the bottom floor of the underground parking garage. Everything from screaming to loud chewing to inhuman grunts and snarls were rumored to be heard. It was no small coincidence, thought the office rumor mill, that the last 4 people who were no longer with the company had parking spots that were on the lower levels of the ramp. Alexander was preparing to leave the office to start his weekend one Friday when he got an ominous email from upper management. "Attention all employees, we have great news in store for you. Due to the bold success of Project Pinnacle, which utilized state-of-the-industry, proactive, efficiency-sizing techniques to smart-size our workforce, we have freed up enough parking spaces to lease the upper levels of our parking garage to tenants of that new luxury apartment across the street. This amazing synergy was only made possible because one of our very own board members is a proud part owner of that building. Due to this exciting news, your parking spaces have been reassigned as per the attached PDF document. Remember that as one united family, we thrive together to enable our ideal future. Also note that the parking garage elevators are now off limits to non-executives, as the apartment building's valets will require priority access." Alexander looked at the new parking assignments. He was now on the second to bottom level, in Ted's old spot. He would have to leave even earlier for work on Monday to allow time to take the stairs up to the office. On Monday morning, Alexander arrived at the office early as planned. By habit, he nearly drove to his old parking spot, but came to his senses before he pulled in. He drove past and descended the levels of the garage, one by one. It could have been his imagination, or a lack of maintenance, but with each level he descended, the garage seemed to get just a little bit gloomier, darker, and more foreboding. As he arrived at his newly assigned spot, he took note of the layer of oily soot that covered every surface, and the overhead light with an irregular flicker, and, of course, the barricade, preventing cars from driving to the lowest level, which his new spot was right next to. Alexander tried to ignore all of this as he walked to the stairwell, but what we couldn't ignore was the symphony of sounds that filled the place. He had arrived before most of his coworkers, so the sounds were not idle chatter or footsteps, but rather what sounded almost like grunting and heavy breathing. Or was that a fan trying to move the musty air? Was that a muffled scream or a shop bearing? Was that chewing or some indescribable machine running? And then there was the smell. Alexander didn't have a good baseline for what the lower levels of a parking garage should smell like, but the pungent, oily air which overwhelmed his senses carried something almost like organic decay that seemed out of place. Alexander walked as fast as he could to the door for the stairwell to start his ascent. He was about half a flight up when the door finally snapped shut behind him. It was no small relief when that happened. Although it was mustier and more dank than the parking garage itself, it at least felt more secure. He plodded up the stairs at a slow but even pace, trying not to break a sweat because he knew that if he did, he would have to sit with that feeling all day. When he finally got to the top of the parking garage, he practically ran from the stairwell to the office lobby elevators. These were bright, well lit, and still available to employees. He ran in, pressed the button for his floor, and let out a sigh of relief when the door finished closing behind him. He spent the day trying to find a sense of normalcy, trying to forget the terrible sounds, smells, and overall atmosphere of that parking garage. As he looked over his emails and shuffled through his paperwork, he found himself looking at a note that he had placed on his desk some years ago. Written neatly on a bright pink index card in black Sharpie, it simply said, "Just get through the day." Every time he read it, he would add, "And try not to think about that parking garage." The day trudged on. Morning meetings became lunch in his cube, which became afternoon coffee, which became an email marked urgent that landed in his inbox sharply at 5 p.m., just before he started to pack up his desk. Wait, an email marked urgent from his boss at the end of the day? This sort of thing usually only happened on Fridays. He read the email in disbelief. "Alexander, I have some exciting news wrapped in an extremely urgent request. 2 months ago, one of the executives asked me to consolidate some performance metrics that are due tomorrow. I absolutely can't do it because I have a can of tomato soup that is about to pass the best by date, and I absolutely must get the best possible experience out of my canned food. So I chose you to consolidate the metrics for me. It'll look super great in your performance review at the end of the year, and it might finally be enough to bump you past to get that promotion that I've been promising you. Just don't forget to sign in as me so the created by field shows my name and not yours." Remember that as one united family, we thrive together to enable our ideal future. Signed, Daryl. Alexander knew the drill. Again, the only surprise was that it happened on a Monday instead of a Friday. The distraction would have been welcome had his boss sent it in the morning or early afternoon. He did the work and faithfully completed the assignment. However, he had a moment of impulsivity where he signed in with his own username to submit the final draft. This would make a statement and give him something besides that parking garage to worry about until tomorrow morning. At least, he hoped it would. He knew that he could change it as soon as he got in, and no one would ever know, but for now the small act of rebellion felt good. The work was submitted, and it was only 2 hours past his usual quitting time. That was a win, but it did mean that he was now the last one out of the office, and he would have to make it down to his car alone. Alexander got into the elevators and took them down to the lobby out of the office. From there, he transferred into the stairwell going down into the parking garage. The air felt heavier, and the atmosphere felt even more oppressive than it had in the morning. With each step down, he felt his stomach ball up a little more. With each flight down, he felt a throbbing in the back of his head that told him to stop. He also felt those terrible noises even before he heard them. Whatever was down there, or possibly his imagination, was louder and more active than it had been in the morning. There were sounds of snarling and smacking and guttural screaming resonating in his head. It got to a point where they were so loud and so oppressive that he found himself standing on a landing with no more stairs below him and a propped open door. He had gone too far and was on the lowest level. The smells and sounds had absolutely overpowered Alexander to a point of paralysis as he stood in a daze trying to process what he was seeing. The floor was covered in dirt and hay. There were 3 goats wandering around, snacking on what looked like leftover catered food from executives' lunches. No wonder they stopped giving them to employees after the daily executive meetings. And 4 men, 3 of whom were using rakes and dustpans to grab the goats' droppings as soon as they hit the floor and depositing them into bins which were ready to be loaded onto a truck. The 4th man, who was supervising, saw Alexander standing there. "What are you doing here? You're not allowed here. Who are you?" In a panic, Alexander stammered, I'm nobody. I'm just looking for my car." As Alexander sputtered out his reply, the men surrounded him, and the leader stepped forward to address him. "What you saw here is top secret." What did I see here?" asked Alexander in an extremely confused tone. "Don't you know who I am? I am a self-made millionaire. My daddy just gave me $5 million, and I used it to found a company that's going to disrupt the direct-to-consumer fertilizer market. You see, I invested the money instead of spending it on fancy coffee, avocado toast, and big TVs like most people would have. I already even have my first contract. I'll be fertilizing the plants in the lobby of Daddy's brand new apartment building across the street." "What?" replied Alexander, even more confused. "Well, now that you know this, we can't have you blabbing about my success. Us disruptors can't have our competition finding out our business model." The next day, Daryl logged in. He knew that the performance metrics would be there and would be correct. But when he opened them, he immediately noticed that the created by field said, "Alexander, inactive." That's when the email notification popped up. He didn't even have to open it to know what it said. Alexander is no longer with the company. Merry Christmas, and I hope that you enjoyed this year's scary goat story.